There is a saying among the Ibo people of Lagos: the man who leaves his compound for too long should not be surprised to find strangers sleeping in his bed. But Taiwo Babatunde Okonkwo had never believed that saying applied to him. He had a wife. He had a best friend. He had a home. He had been a fool. Taiwo stepped off the Okada motorcycle at the entrance of Gbagada Estate on a Tuesday, not a Friday, not a Sunday when people expected arrivals. A Tuesday. No phone call. No warning. Just a battered travel bag on his shoulder and 3 years of hard labor in his bones from the construction sites of Abuja, where he had gone to build a future for the family he loved. 3 years of dried eba swallowed alone in a zinc-roofed bunk room. 3 years of sending money home every month, every single month, without fail. He wore his favorite Ankara jacket, the deep blue and gold one that Ngozi had sewn for him the week before he left. It was a little tighter now across the shoulders. He had grown harder from the work, but he had kept it carefully folded at the bottom of his bag for exactly this moment. The moment he walked back through his own gate like a man who had earned his rest. The harmattan wind was blowing softly across the estate, carrying the smell of suya smoke from a nearby buka. Children played football in the dust of the street outside. A woman hanging wrapper on a line paused to look at him, then looked away too quickly. Taiwo noticed but did not think much of it. His compound gate was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly. The familiar creak of the hinge, the one he had promised Ngozi he would oil before he left and never did, sang out like a greeting. The generator was running. That surprised him. It was only 6 in the evening, still light enough. Ngozi was not one to waste fuel. Inside the parlor window, the pale glow of the television flickered. He could hear the low murmur of a Yoruba film playing. Taiwo set his bag down quietly inside the gate. Something made him pause. Some ancient instinct, the kind his grandmother used to say lived in the blood of men who paid attention, made him walk softly. His Agbada sandals barely scraped the concrete as he moved toward the front door. It was unlocked, too. He stepped inside. The parlor was warm. The smell hit him first, egusi soup, rich with stockfish and crayfish and the particular sweetness of yuzuza leaves that Ngozi alone knew how to balance. His stomach turned with hunger and with love simultaneously. 3 years, and she still cooked like a woman who remembered him. He looked toward the kitchen. The pot sat on the small gas cooker, lid slightly open, steam still curling lazily upward. The soup was still warm. 2 bowls on the kitchen table. 2 spoons, side by side. Taiwo stood very still. He looked at the bowls for a long time. His mind offered him explanations, her sister visiting, a neighbor, a church member. His mind was generous that way. His heart was not. He walked to the corridor that led to the bedroom. The bedroom he had built with his own hands in 2019, mixing cement himself on weekends because he could not afford to pay laborers. The bedroom where Ngozi had wept with joy when they first painted the walls yellow. He heard the voice before he reached the door. It was not Ngozi's voice. It was deeper, familiar in a way that made the ground tilt beneath Taiwo's feet. It was the voice of Segun Ademi, his best friend since secondary school at King's College Lagos. The man who had stood as his best man at his wedding. The man who had helped him pack his bags when he left for Abuja, who had clasped his hand at the bus park and said, "Brother, I will look after everything here. I swear on my father's grave." Segun was laughing like a man without a single sin on his soul. Taiwo pushed open the bedroom door. The world stopped. Ngozi was seated on the edge of the bed, their bed, wearing a wrapper Taiwo had never seen before, expensive-looking, deep burgundy with gold embroidery. Segun sat beside her, close, his hand resting on the small of her back with the casual comfort of a man who had done it 1,000 times. They were watching something on Segun's phone, heads almost touching, and Ngozi was laughing too, the same laugh she used to save only for Taiwo. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then Ngozi saw him. The laugh died in her throat like a flame snuffed by a wet cloth. She stood up so fast the phone clattered to the floor. Her hands flew to her face. "Taiwo." Segun rose slowly. He was heavier than Taiwo remembered, better dressed. He wore a kaftan of fine Aso oak that Taiwo recognized. Taiwo himself had helped pick the fabric 3 years ago for a celebration that never happened. He looked at Taiwo with eyes that moved through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, guilt, calculation, and then, God help him, a flicker of defiance. Taiwo, brother, it is not. Do not. Taiwo's voice came out quiet. That was the thing about real pain, it did not shout. It went very, very quiet. Do not call me brother. Ngozi was crying already, her hands shaking as she reached toward him. Taiwo, please just listen. But Taiwo had already turned. He walked back through the corridor, past the still warm pot of egusi soup, past the 2 bowls and 2 spoons, out through the front door, back through the compound gate that still needed oiling. He sat down on his travel bag in the street, outside his own home. And for the first time in 3 years, Taiwo Babatunde Okonkwo wept. If this story already has your heart pounding, you are not alone. Taiwo worked for 3 years with his bare hands, and this is what he came home to. Before you scroll away, ask yourself, what would you do in his place? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button now and ring the notification bell. Next chapter is coming, and trust me, you do not want to miss what Taiwo does next. In the old quarters of Gbagada, news travels faster than okada on an empty road. By the time darkness settled over the estate that Tuesday evening, half the compound women already knew that Taiwo had come back and found Segun inside his house. Mama Chinier, who sold akara by the gate, had seen Taiwo sitting on his bag in the street. She had gone back inside and told her husband, who told his brother, who told the chairman of the compound association, Baba Lowell, before the night prayer had even been called. Nobody came out to speak to Taiwo directly. That was the way of things. Sympathy in Lagos often wore the face of silence. Taiwo sat outside for 2 hours. He did not weep anymore after those first terrible minutes. He had grown up watching his father, a retired soldier from Ogun State, swallow pain like Gary, dry, without water, without flinching. He straightened his back, wiped his face with the hem of his Ankara jacket, and thought carefully about what a man of dignity does when the earth opens beneath his feet. He did not go back inside that night. He walked 3 streets over to the home of his Uncle Festus, his father's elder brother, a retired teacher who had always been the family's keeper of wisdom. Uncle Festus was 71 years old, thin as a dry season river, with eyes that had seen every kind of trouble. When he opened his door and saw Taiwo standing there with nothing but his travel bag and a face stripped bare of everything, he said only one thing. Come inside, I will make tea. They sat together in the old man's sitting room under a ceiling fan that wobbled with every rotation. Uncle Festus listened without interrupting while Taiwo told him everything. The warm soup, the 2 bowls, Segun's hand on Ngozi's back, the expensive wrapper she wore, bought with whose money, Taiwo now wondered aloud, since the only money flowing into that house for 3 years had come from his own sweat in Abuja. When Taiwo finished, Uncle Festus was quiet for a long time. How long have you known Segun? He asked finally. Since we were 14 years old, Taiwo said. 22 years. Uncle Festus nodded slowly. And in all that time, did he ever want what you had? Taiwo opened his mouth to say no, and stopped. A memory surfaced without invitation. The day Taiwo had introduced Ngozi to his friends at a gathering in Surulere. Segun had held her hand a moment too long during the greeting. Taiwo had noticed but told himself it meant nothing. Another memory. Segun arguing against Taiwo taking the Abuja contract, saying it was too far, too long, that a man should not leave his wife alone. Taiwo had thought it was brotherly concern. He thought about how readily Segun had agreed, eventually, to look after things. How enthusiastically. I was blind, Taiwo said. You were trusting, Uncle Festus corrected him gently. These are not the same thing. Blindness is a defect of the eyes. Trust is a gift of the heart. The sin belongs to those who abused it, not to you. That night, lying on Uncle Festus's old guest mattress, Taiwo stared at the ceiling and reviewed 3 years of phone calls with Ngozi. The times she had seemed distracted. The month, 8 months ago, when she had stopped asking when he was coming home. He had told himself she was simply adjusting to independence. He had praised her for it. He had sent extra money that month because he felt guilty for being away so long. He remembered the last call just 4 days ago. He had told her he was finishing his final contract and coming home soon. She had said, "Okay, Taiwo," just that. "Okay, Taiwo," no excitement, no joy. He had told himself she was tired. In the morning, Taiwo rose before the cock crowed. He washed his face, straightened his Ankara jacket, and walked back to the compound. He arrived just as Mama Chinier was setting up her akara frying station by the gate. She looked at him with eyes full of something he could not name, pity, perhaps, or admiration, or both. "Mama Chinier," he said quietly, "how long?" She did not pretend not to understand. She looked at her frying pan for a moment. "Since 8 months after you left, Taiwo, maybe 9. She paused. "I wanted to call you many times, but it was not my place." "You should have called me," he said, without anger, just truth. "Yes," she said simply, "I should have." He walked through the compound gate. Ngozi was in the parlor, dressed in a simple cotton blouse, sitting with her hands folded in her lap as though she had been waiting all night. Her eyes were red and swollen. The 2 bowls and spoons from the night before were still on the kitchen table. She had not even washed them. Segun was gone. His kaftan and his pride and his borrowed comfort all gone. Ngozi stood up when Taiwo entered. "Taiwo, please." "Sit down," he said, not harshly, with the firmness of a man who had decided something overnight. "We are going to talk, and you are going to tell me everything, from the beginning, leave nothing out." Ngozi sat. And the truth, long overdue, began to come out. Ngozi Okonkwo, née Adayinka, had been beautiful since the day she was born, or so her mother had always told her. She had grown up in the Mushin district of Lagos, the 3rd daughter of a retired civil servant, raised on jollof rice, discipline, and the understanding that a woman's worth was measured by the home she kept. She had married Taiwo at 26, loved him genuinely at first, and had believed, truly believed, that love was enough insulation against the cold that crept in when a husband was 3 years away. She sat across from him now, and felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. "I did not plan it," she began. Her voice was low, her hands still folded tight in her lap as though holding herself together. "You have to believe that, Taiwo." Taiwo said nothing. He sat in the wooden chair across from her, the chair he had bought at Balagun Market before their wedding, and watched her with eyes that were patient and terrible at the same time. "Segun came around often, every week at first, then more. He said you asked him to check on me." She glanced up quickly. "Did you ask him?" "I told him to make sure you were safe," Taiwo said, "not to make himself at home in my marriage." Ngozi looked down again. "He brought things, food sometimes, money when the house allowance ran short. I know now why it ran short. I know now he was the one controlling how the compound association fees were paid, the small bills that added up. He made himself necessary, Taiwo. I do not say this to excuse myself. I say it so you understand how it happened." "When?" Taiwo asked, one word flat as a stone. "The 2nd year," she whispered. "After 14 months alone." She closed her eyes briefly. "You were in Abuja. I had not seen your face in over a year. I called you one night and you did not pick up. You were working a night shift. I cried the whole night alone. And Segun came the next morning." A tear slipped down her cheek. "He knew when I was at my lowest. He always knew." Taiwo absorbed this. He thought of that night shift. He remembered every night shift, the loud construction machinery, the phones left in the bunk. He thought of all the nights she had cried alone that he had not known about. "Did you love him?" he asked. The question fell into the room like a heavy stone into still water. Ngozi flinched visibly. "I told myself it was comfort," she said at last. "I told myself it was not real, that you would come back and I would end it and you would never know." She paused. "But the longer it went on, the more I stopped believing you were coming back." "I sent money every month," Taiwo said quietly. "Money is not a husband," she said, and then immediately recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth as though she could take the words back. "Taiwo, I did not mean." "No," he held up one hand. "Say what you mean, Ngozi. Today say everything. There is no more time for half-truths in this house. She swallowed hard. I felt abandoned. I know that was not your intention. I know you went for us, but I was alone, Taiwo, and loneliness is a very powerful thing. She pressed her hands against her face. I am not asking you to forgive me today. I know what I have done. I know I have broken something that cannot easily be repaired. I just want you to know that I am ashamed, completely ashamed. Taiwo stood and walked to the window. Outside, the compound was waking up. He could hear children's voices, the distant sound of a radio playing highlife. The world was impossibly normal. And Segun, he said, still facing the window. What did he tell you about me? While all of this was happening, what did he say about his brother, his friend? Silence behind him. He turned. Ngozi's expression had shifted. Something new moved across her face, something that looked almost like anger breaking through the shame. He said you were having a woman in Abuja, she said quietly. He said someone had told him. He showed me a picture once, a woman standing outside a construction office. He said it was you and her. She folded her hands tighter. I did not fully believe him, but I half believed him, and that half was enough. The air in the room changed. Taiwo stood very still. There was no woman in Abuja. I know that now. Segun fabricated evidence to justify what he was already doing, and to keep you from leaving him. Ngozi said nothing, but her hands were trembling now. Taiwo picked up his travel bag from the corner where he had left it and placed it on the table. He unzipped it slowly and removed a single envelope, the kind a bank issues for official documentation. He set it on the table between them. This is 3 years of payment records, he said. Every transfer I made to this house, every naira. I kept records, Ngozi, not because I suspected you, but because my father taught me that a man documents his love so that no one can ever dispute it. He looked at her steadily. There was no woman. There was only work and sacrifice and the belief that I was building something worth coming home to. Ngozi stared at the envelope. Then she placed her face in her hands and wept, the kind of weeping that comes not from sadness alone, but from the full and devastating recognition of one's own mistakes. Taiwo stood and watched her for a long moment. Then he picked up his travel bag and walked to the second bedroom, the small room they had used for storage, and began to clear a space for himself. He was not yet ready to sleep in his own bedroom, but he was not leaving his own house either. 3 days passed in the Okonkwo compound, like 3 stones, sinking slowly to the bottom of a river. Taiwo moved through those days with the deliberate quiet of a man who was thinking very deeply. He ate when he needed to. He greeted neighbors with a nod. He sat with Uncle Festus each evening and spoke carefully about what he intended to do. He did not touch his phone to call Segun. He did not send a message. He did not ask anyone to act as a go-between. He waited. In the markets and streets of Gbagada, stories like his had always been settled one of 2 ways, with noise or with wisdom. The noisy way involved shouting in compounds, broken furniture, and police wahala that brought shame on everyone. The wise way involved patience, community, and the kind of confrontation that a man carries himself to with his dignity intact. Taiwo chose the wise way. On the 4th morning, he sent a single message to Segun. No insults, no threats, just, come to my compound today at noon. Bring nothing but your conscience. Uncle Festus will be here. He also invited Mama Adenola, the oldest woman on the estate, a woman of 78 years who served as the informal moral authority of the entire street, and Baba Lowell, the compound chairman. He set out chairs in the compound yard beneath the single large mango tree that stood at the center of the space, its branches spread wide like open arms. Ngozi knew the gathering was coming. She did not protest it. She dressed in a plain black wrapper and blouse, the kind worn to difficult occasions, and sat to one side. Her eyes were dry. She had finished the weeping portion of things. Now she sat with the stillness of a woman prepared to receive whatever judgment came. Segun arrived 12 minutes late. He drove in his Honda Accord, newer model than Taiwo's, wearing a navy blue agbada embroidered at the collar in silver thread. He had dressed carefully for this, Taiwo noticed. He had put on armor. But armor, Taiwo knew, was simply an advertisement of fear. Segun sat in the empty chair across from Taiwo. Uncle Festus sat to one side, Mama Adenola to the other, Baba Lowell behind them. The small assembly gave the encounter its proper weight. This was not a fight. This was an accounting. Segun Ademi, Uncle Festus began, addressing him by full name the way elders do when ceremony is required. You know why you are here. Segun looked at Taiwo rather than the old man. I came because I respect Taiwo. Do not begin with a lie, Taiwo said calmly. If you respected me, we would not be sitting here. Segun's jaw tightened. I know I have wronged you. Tell me how, Taiwo said. In your own words, tell everyone here what you did. Something moved through Segun's face. The desire to minimize, to reframe, to soften. The calculation lasted only a moment before Mama Adenola's eyes fell on him with the full weight of 78 years of watching men make foolish choices and then try to talk their way out of them. Segun cleared his throat. I was wrong to pursue Ngozi while you were away. I was wrong to allow myself into your home in that way. And the photograph, Taiwo said quietly. Segun went still. The photograph you showed my wife, the woman you told her was my mistress in Abuja. Taiwo's voice did not rise. It remained level, clear, and devastating. Where did that photograph come from? For a long moment, the only sound in the compound was the wind through the mango tree. I was afraid she would stop seeing me, Segun said at last. It came out like something he had kept underwater too long and could no longer hold down. I knew she still loved you. I knew if you came back, she would return to you completely. So he stopped. You fabricated it, Taiwo finished for him. Yes, Segun said, one word, heavy as iron. Mama Adenola made a sound, not quite a word, but a sound that carried the weight of profound disgust. Baba Lowell shook his head slowly. Uncle Festus looked at the sky briefly, as though asking God for patience. Taiwo leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. He looked at Segun with eyes that held no anger anymore. Anger had burned itself out in the first night. What remained was something colder and cleaner. I am not going to fight you. Segun, I am not going to disgrace you beyond what you have disgraced yourself. But I want you to understand something, and I want everyone here to witness that you have understood it. Segun met his gaze. 22 years of friendship. 22 years of my trust, my loyalty, my brotherhood. You had all of it. And you threw it away not for love, not even for real love, but for convenience and cowardice. Taiwo's voice, finally, broke slightly at the edges. I would have given my life for you. That is the truth you need to carry. Segun looked away. His chin moved. His agbada seemed suddenly too large for him. I am ending our friendship today, Taiwo continued. Not in anger, but in finality. You are no longer welcome in my compound, at my table, or in my life. This is not a punishment, it is a boundary, and it stands forever. He looked at Uncle Festus, who nodded gravely. You may go, Uncle Festus said to Segun. Segun rose. He straightened his agbada with hands that were not quite steady. He looked once at Ngozi, who looked at the ground. He looked once more at Taiwo. Whatever he saw in Taiwo's face made him close his mouth around whatever last thing he might have said. He walked to his Honda Accord. He started the engine. He drove out of the compound. And Taiwo watched him go and felt, beneath the grief, the very first thin thread of something that might, in time, become peace. No shouting, no violence, no police, just truth, elders, and a man standing in the full dignity of who he is. Taiwo handled this the way a real man handles betrayal, and Segun had no answer for it. Tell us in the comments, did Taiwo do the right thing? Should he have done more? This is the chapter people are sharing across the world right now. Make sure your friends see it. Subscribe if you have not, and get ready, next chapter is the ending nobody saw coming. A week after Segun's Honda Accord disappeared from the compound gate, the silence in the Okonkwo home began to shift. It was not a comfortable silence. It was not the silence of forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not for a long time. But it was no longer the silence of shock and devastation. It had become something else, the silence of two people standing at the edge of a great decision, each waiting to see if the other would step back from the edge or fall. Taiwo had remained in the storage room. He had cleaned it properly, set up the old metal frame bed from Uncle Festus's spare room, and arranged his things with the methodical tidiness of a man who had lived in bunk rooms and construction camps for 3 years. He was not uncomfortable. He had slept in worse places. It was Ngozi who came to him on the 8th night. She knocked on the storage room door at 9 o'clock, after the generator had been turned off and the compound had gone quiet. Taiwo was reading an old novel his Uncle Festus had given him, a story about a man who rebuilt himself from ruins. He set the book down when he heard the knock. "Come in," he said. Ngozi entered. She carried 2 cups of tea on a tray, the kind of gesture so small and so enormous at the same time that Taiwo had to look at the wall for a moment to compose himself. She was wearing a simple Ankara house dress, no jewelry, hair wrapped in a plain headtie. She looked in that moment like the woman he had married, before the distance, before the loneliness, before Segun's patient poison. She set the tray on the small table and sat on the only other available surface, a wooden box that had once held his tools. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what I want to say to you. I have been thinking for 8 days. She looked at him directly. "I am not going to ask you to forgive me. That is something only you can decide in your own time. What I want to say is I see clearly now what I could not see before." Taiwo wrapped both hands around his cup of tea, but did not drink. "I let loneliness make decisions for me," Ngozi continued. "And I let a man I should not have trusted close enough to rewrite the story I believed about you. I allowed it. Whatever Segun did, he could not have done it without my permission. And I gave that permission, Taiwo." Her voice was steady, deliberately so. "That is mine to carry. I will carry it." Taiwo looked at her for a long time. He thought about the 14 months she had spent alone before she broke. He thought about the fake photograph, Segun's cruelty, deliberate and premeditated. He thought about his own choice to go to Abuja, the choice that had felt necessary, that had been necessary, and the cost of it that no one had anticipated. "I was not a perfect husband before I left," he said at last. Ngozi blinked. "I worked too much even when I was here," he said. "I did not always listen when you spoke. I postponed things, the holiday we said we would take, the children we said we would discuss, the oil on the gate I never put." A small, pained sound left him. "I do not say this to share the blame for what happened. What you did and what Segun did, those are your burdens. But I have been honest with myself this week, Ngozi. I was not fully present even before I was absent." The room was very still. "So here is what I am willing to say tonight," Taiwo continued. "I am not willing to pretend this did not happen. I am not willing to sweep it under the mat and perform happiness for the neighbors. But I am also not, yet, ready to say this marriage is finished. What I am willing to do is begin again. Slowly, honestly, without performing." He looked at her. "If you are willing to do the same." Ngozi held very still for a moment. Then she exhaled, a long, shaking breath that seemed to release something she had been holding since before he even walked through the door. "Yes," she said, "I am willing." They did not embrace. They were not yet at the place of embrace. But they drank their tea together in the small storage room under the yellow light of a single bulb, and they talked, really talked, the way they had not talked since before Abuja, perhaps since before they were married. They talked about what they had each needed and not known how to ask for. They talked about fear, about silence, about the things people do when they feel invisible. They talked until midnight. Outside, the compound was at rest. The mango tree stood patient in the dark compound yard. The gate with its unbroken creak waited. The kitchen where the egusi pot had betrayed everything was clean and quiet. In the morning, Taiwo rose early. He went to the small hardware shop on the estate road and bought a tin of oil. He came back, knelt by the compound gate, and oiled the hinge. It had taken 3 years, and the worst week of his life. But the gate no longer cried when it opened. It swung in silence, the silence of something finally, carefully tended. And Taiwo Babatunde Okonkwo stood up, straightened his Ankara jacket, and walked back into his home. Not as a man defeated. As a man who had chosen, eyes open, to stay. The gate that Taiwo never oiled before he left, the small, neglected thing, was the first thing he fixed when he chose to stay. That is not an accident. That is the wisdom of this story. Sometimes the smallest neglected things carry the biggest meaning. Taiwo lost a friend he should never have trusted. He discovered a wife who made a terrible mistake. And he found, in the rubble of all of it, the courage to begin again with honesty instead of performance. That is the African way. That is the human way. If this story moved you, share it right now. Not tomorrow, right now. Someone in your life needs this story today. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this. Hit the notification bell. New stories drop every week. Comment below. What was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? We tell these stories because they are true, even when they are fiction. Because somewhere, right now, a Taiwo is sitting on a travel bag outside his own home, and he needs to know he is not alone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. We will see you in the next story.